This week on Empowering Midlife Wellness, I'm sharing a little bit about the book that I have in progress. I'm talking about what motivates us to do what we know is right in terms of taking care of our health. Goodness knows we all have masses of knowledge about what is the healthiest thing to do in terms of nutrition, exercise, sleep, relationships, hormone balance. We know all these things. So let's talk about how we put those into practice and create choices ongoing that are best for our health, our longevity, and ultimately for those who are going to take care of us when we get older. Hi friends, and welcome to this week's episode. If you're just joining me, I'm Dr. Susan. I'm a board-certified gynecologist and certified menopause practitioner, and something you might not know about me is I'm also a certified life and leadership coach. And probably about half of what we do in menopausal and wellness medicine is in the realm of coaching and helping patients to find out what they really want for the second half of life. So this is really a passion of mine that I want to share with you today. Some things that have come up for me that have led to my decision to write another book. So I'm halfway through this book. I'm going to share some of these ideas with you. And I want you to hang in there because I'm going to string together some potentially rather complex ideas. But in the end, this could really change your health and your life as it did for me to understand these concepts. So I'm going to start by just identifying the problem, so to speak. We have so much knowledge about what to do, what's healthy for us. You know what to do. You're watching videos. Your bookshelf is probably like mine, full of books about how to eat right, how to exercise, how to meditate, how to have healthy relationships, lots of philosophy. My bookshelf is sort of like an altar to all of the ways that I wish that I would be in my highest self, right? And yours probably is too. So we have no lack of knowledge. My patients know what to do. They could literally write a book about what it is that I'm telling them. So the knowledge is not the problem. It's the motivation to put those things into practice consistently and to feel good about it. So let's talk about that. The world is pumping out masses of information every day, podcasts, YouTube videos, Instagram, social media about how to be healthy, but we're actually not getting healthier. The country's getting sicker. So that is not working. So I want to address what will actually work. And this does work. This has worked for me, and it's working for our patients. I'm going to categorize people into three basic states. Now, this is not putting you in a box. This is just noticing that there are three basic states that I've seen that we can each be in at different times in relation to how we approach our health. All right, person number one is not doing any of the things that she knows is good for her health. She's not eating healthy. She's not exercising. She's not getting good sleep. Maybe she's drinking too much or engaging in some other bad habits, too much social media, too much TV, all of the things. Her relationships are not great. Now, she knows how to do all those things. It's not a lack of knowledge, but she's really struggling to put those into place, and she feels awful. You know that awful feeling that you get in your chest? We often call it in our heart, on the left side of our chest. She doesn't feel good because she's out of alignment with what she knows is best for her health. All right, hold that thought, and we'll move on to person number two. Person number two, you might be in this state at any time as well. I'm often in state of person number one for different times of the day or the month. Person number two is doing all of the things. She's eating healthy food, she's exercising, she's getting her good sleep, she's working on her relationship, she's doing her meditation practice or her yoga, all of the things that sound great and on the outside might look like she's in really great shape, but she's still feeling that awful feeling in her chest, and she's feeling disconnected from herself because she's operating with an outside motivation, with a feeling of obligation, like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to drag myself there and do it because I have to, and then I'm going to eat this food that I don't like because Dr. Susan said I'm supposed to, and I'm going to sit down and try to meditate because I read in a book it was good for me. None of that motivation is internal. And so if there's a lot of obligation and a lot of resistance. And so I find those patients are equally unhappy. Now, let's go on to person number three, and you can probably imagine this is the person or the state that you may be in at different times. where you're not only doing all the things that you're supposed to do, in quotation marks, you're doing the things you know are good for you. You're eating your healthy food, you're exercising, working on relationships, connecting with others, spending time outside, getting good sleep, being creative, all of these wonderful things. And you feel great because you're living in alignment with what you know is right. And you know that feeling too, right? I love this saying, if you want to feel good, do things you feel good about. Pretty straightforward. Feels good, right? We don't have that feeling in our chest. We feel open, we feel alive, we feel good. And it's somewhat effortless. Now, I want to dig into that word a little bit because certainly what we're doing could be very effortful. Like we might be exercising or being very disciplined or making time to shop for certain things or making appointments with our friends and relatives. It takes effort, no doubt. But the motivation is somewhat effortless. In other words, it just flows. We do it and we do it joyfully. And yes, it might be hard, but it's a practice that just comes easily, right? I'll give you an example. I went out to dinner last week with some of my really good friends, and my friend who was sitting next to me was just blown away by the fact that I was about to do a 100-mile bike ride. So she said something like, I can't believe you do that. How on earth do you do that training? I could never do that. You're so amazing. I could never do anything that hard. Well, this was right after she had just told me that in her 50s, she's decided to go back to college to do an MBA, not just any MBA, one at a very fancy Ivy League school that requires going out of town for 1 week out of every month and then studying for several hours a day. She has a full-time job and she still has a child at home. I said to her, it's just like that. I could never imagine doing that. That sounds so hard. How on earth did you make the decision to do that? And we both sort of laughed, recognizing that each of us were making quite difficult sounding decisions that were completely in line with our heart code. So for her, even though it's a very difficult thing to do, she feels quite easeful about making that decision, even though the work to do it is quite hard. Similar to me, I felt quite easeful about showing up to do a 100-mile bike ride, even though it was very difficult and difficult to train for. But it wasn't a hard decision because it lined up with some of my values, like courage and trying new things and connecting with other people outside and pushing my boundaries, not dissimilar to her values. Now, so just to say, everybody's different, right? But in the end, when we're acting in alignment with our core values or our integrity or our heart's message or whatever it is we want to call it, that internal knowing, we feel good, and activities that are quite difficult sounding can feel almost effortless. Okay, so let's put some dots together here. Let's go back to assuming that you already have the knowledge, yet in whatever aspect of your life you're experiencing either being in person number one, just not being able to do it, or in person number two, doing it with a sense of dread and obligation. In that state, we're in a gap. We're in a gap between the bookshelf person, the aspirational self, the one who's doing all the things that we truly believe are great, and the person who's acting right now, right? Now, why is that? That's just giving words around the fact that we have multiple voices within us. And this is an age-old idea. It's interesting. Aristotle talked about it. It even is mentioned in the Bible. Paul said in Romans something to the effect of, I know what's good, yet I do not do the good. So we've worked on this idea of motivation since the beginning of time. But specifically in the area of healthcare, it's an amazing opportunity to bridge that gap so that we can stop being the most knowledgeable culture since the beginning of time and start being the healthiest culture, because despite having more knowledge than ever, our country is getting sicker and sicker. So pumping more knowledge out is not helping if we're not able to bridge that gap. Okay, so how do we bridge that gap? First of all, we need to identify what it is that is our integrity, our inner wisdom, our core values, whatever you want to call them. Now, I worked on this for some time, and none of those words really worked for me for different reasons. So you have to find a word that works for you. But the word that works for me is my heart code. Now, why did I call it heart code? Because I could feel it in my heart. It was somewhere over here on the left of my chest, and scientists argue that emotions come from our brain, not from our heart, yet we all feel it right here, right? So there's some mystery still that I'll just stay in, where we're feeling it in our heart. It either feels good, like the feeling when we're in love or when we cuddle a puppy, or it feels awful, like the feeling of guilt and shame and grief and regret. And it's usually here or somewhere in our neck, right? We all know that feeling. In those states, our body is actually giving us a message. The discomfort is a message to say, hey, you're on the wrong track. So if we listen to it, it can tell us whether we're in line or we're not. But to do that, we kind of have to sit still for a minute and listen. And then those feelings will start to become apparent if we pay attention to our body. Our body really does keep the score. So let's think about identifying exactly what your particular heart code is so that you can see if your health choices are in alignment with it, because you'll feel good, you'll be healthier, and you'll be setting up a much healthier elderly version of yourself. Or if they're out of alignment with that, you'll feel bad, you'll be less healthy, and the opposite for as you grow older. And here's something that really resonates with me and most of my patients. Now that we're in this age group, most of us are experiencing parents or older relatives who are getting sick or even dying, and we're witnessing what happens with years of chronic disease and how much that causes other people to suffer, as well as the patient. Family members who are having to take care of someone with dementia, for example, or who's immobilized. I mean, it's really, really tough. So it's an act of generosity to do this work. And I'm going to circle back to that because everybody's heart code includes generosity. Give it a try. I've never met a human being whose heart code doesn't include all of the flavors of love. They might appear slightly differently for you, but things like calm, compassion, curiosity, courage, generosity, gratitude, forgiveness, all those wonderful things. And then things that we love to do, like connecting with others, maybe music, art, being outside in nature, the ocean, all the things, right? They'll be different for each of us. Once we've identified that, then the next step is to apply that wisdom to whether it's in line with our actions or not. Now, we'll feel it when it's not, but we can hopefully act before we even have to get that reminder of a stab in the heart. So here's how it works for me. Okay, and see if this resonates with you. We're going to do some logic here. If my heart code includes all the different flavors of love, they show up differently, slightly for me than other people, but I just mentioned some of mine. Then the logical next step is, if I'm in alignment with my heart code, I need to be treating myself with love, generosity, care, all of those things. And that requires making healthy decisions, because taking care of your health, and I'm talking about all the pillars, nutrition, movement, sleep, relationships, of course, hormone optimization, all of that is a loving act to this one, right? To yourself. And the next logical step after that is the piece that I mentioned, that is generous and loving to all the people you care about the most. Because we want to be an ancestor to our descendants that we could be proud of, right? We all have a dream of living to be, 95 or so, and then dropping dead in our sleep after a healthy, exciting, vibrant life, and not having 10 to 20 years of slowly progressing chronic disease that not only makes us suffer, but causes those around us to suffer as well. None of us want to do that if we can avoid it. Obviously, getting sick and dying is unavoidable. However, a lot of chronic diseases, and we know the big ones, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, osteoporosis, Alzheimer's disease, multiple cancers, are dramatically changeable by the choices we make today. So it's such an empowering idea, I think, that what I decide to do next, what you decide to do next, makes a huge difference to not only your future, but to the future of the people you love the most and to society. And you get to do it in a way where you feel good now, because you don't have that awful feeling in your chest because you're not doing what you know is best for you. You get to feel good now, you get to feel good as you age, and you get to live longer as an act of generosity to others instead of a tight fear of dying. Because why do we want to live a long time anyway if we're so miserable? Really? Let's enjoy ourselves because life is full of wonder and curiosity, and at the same time, stick around longer so we can be of more service to others and not dump a pile of work on other people to do because we didn't do the work to take care of our health. So I think you're getting the idea, but returning to the steps of, okay, that sounds fine, but how do I do that? I'm going to review and add a little bit extra here. First of all, we've got to identify what our heart code is. You might call it your integrity, your North Star, your conscience, the part of you that knows what's right. And you can get there by asking yourself different questions like, what do I love? What values do I admire most in other people? When do I feel light and open and free? And just explore and sit and listen and write down some of those words. And they don't have to be words that represent the way you act all the time right now. They're aspirational qualities. So once you've got those in mind, then notice how you feel when you act out of alignment with those qualities or when you act in alignment with those qualities. And I'm positive that you'll notice what I mentioned. We feel awful when we don't do the right thing in this context for our health. And we feel great when we do. And at some point, those great decisions become somewhat effortless. Not that they're not hard things, but they start flowing effortlessly because when we do the right thing, we want to do more of it because it feels good. And so this truly does become something that grows and expands as you practice it. And it's a practice, so you have to practice it. Now, when we find ourselves in that spot where I'm about to eat a pint of ice cream or drink 2 glasses of wine, those are common things that might happen to me that I would later have that awful feeling of regret because I don't believe those are good for my health. If I can stop for a moment and ask myself this question, I think it's a really important question. Which part of my personality is operating right now? And do I want to align with that or not? It's just a question. You might align with it or you might not, but the question is really relevant, and it speaks to the fact that we've got lots of competing voices within us, right? Do I want to align with that one or not? And if I can clearly see that aligning with that particular behavior is going to lead me somewhere that's not good, I might say to that part something like, hey, thanks for checking on me. I know you're trying to help me feel better with this wine and ice cream, but that is not going to work. It's never worked before. It's not going to work today. It's a dead end of some sort. That will never work out. So something like that, and you can come up with your own words, but being able to recognize that part is, first of all, trying to help, but they're not helping in a particularly useful way anymore. Recognize that that is part of you, and then decide to make a different decision. So number 1, identify your heart code. Number 2, see how it feels when you act in line and out of line. That way you'll be motivated to do those good things more frequently. And then start a practice of recognizing who's driving this car, who's running this show, right? And when those parts come out that are trying to lead you in a way that you know ends in something that's not helpful, have a little quick conversation with yourself. It's a really great way to hardwire new behaviors. And just speaking about behaviors or habits, I want to throw out an idea to consider that I personally don't like the idea of forming new habits. I think breaking old habits that have led us down unhealthy paths is a great idea, but moving out of habits altogether and into choices. And the reason why that resonates with me is because habits can feel obligatory, right? So going back to person number 2 who's doing those things out of obligation, you might ask, how is that possible? Because must be in line with her heart code if she's taking care of her health. Well, she might be in line with her heart code, but she's not in touch with what her heart code is. In that state, when we're doing something and feel an obligation from outside, we're being driven by a part that isn't our highest self, just to say. And I do this frequently, where I find myself doing something and feel like it's an act of obligation, and I have to remind myself, like, this is actually a choice. Nobody is making me ride 100 miles. And I love this reframe. It's used frequently. I don't have to, fill in the blank, ride 100 miles. I get to, or I choose to, but I love that I get to. So when we're in person number 2 and feeling obliged, that's because we're trying to force another habit, which doesn't feel like freedom. Habits to me do not feel like freedom. Habits are a lack of freedom. So moving into this new space, I'm going to get rid of the word habit and start thinking about making healthy choices. Consciously saying which part of my personality is operating right now and do I want to align with that? I'm going to choose which one. And notice in my body how that leads to not only a better feeling inside myself, but actual better physical and emotional health, better relationships, better years of life, and less suffering at the end, so less suffering for others. And isn't that the ultimate act of generosity? So this is the idea that I'm sharing with you that's going to turn into a book in 2025. I hope that made sense. I hope it resonated with you. I can't wait to tell you more about it as this project continues. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe and share it with your friends. And I can't wait to see you next week.